Hi, friends. Welcome on this lovely Wednesday. We're glad you're here. I'm Ethan. This is Ali and Tom. You'll meet them in just a moment. We'll introduce ourselves. This is a case study of a successful college application process and what you can learn from it. So, we're going to get in on a real application from a real student that Ali worked with not long ago and talk to you about what the process was like, what are the things that you can learn from it. And we're going to get Tom's perspective as a former admission officer sort of giving us that lens. So, without further ado, Ali, will you introduce yourself to the peoples?
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Allie. I am an essay coach with College Essay Guy. I'm also a program advisor. So if you call in, you'll be able to chat with me about all things essays. I've been working with College Essay Guy since I think 2021, pandemic times. I am a former professional ballet dancer turned essay coach. And what brings me to this work is, being able to lead students through this pretty, what I think, deeply self-reflective and rigorous writing and thought process to help them to understand themselves better and to sort of, see more for themselves.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks. Tom.
Hi, everyone. So, if you have not met me before, my name is Tom Campbell. I've been working at College Essay Guy. This is my fifth year on the team. And prior to working here at CEG, I was an independent school college counselor. I worked at a school in Seattle, Washington, Lakeside School. It's kind of famous for its because it's where Bill Gates went to school. Very fun. And Jeff Bezos was in the audience for my intro to college presentation, shiny ball head and all. And prior to that, I worked in college admissions for a total of 6 years. So I spent 4 years working in the admission office at Pomona College, which is a highly selective college. And by that, I mean like 7% admit rate. So like highly rejective is what we like to call it, for 4 years. And then prior to that, I worked at my alma mater, College of the Holy Cross, go Purple, which is also another selective liberal arts college. So my goal with sessions like this and being part of them is to help share that behind the scenes information of what it's like being an admission officer making these kinds of decisions. And that's kind of really my role today as well, is giving that lens and insight on the amazing application that we're about to walk through. So glad to be
Hey,
here.
thanks. And we've got behind the scenes Jasmine, who's taking care of us in the chat. If you all have questions, just throw them into the Q&A and we will make sure to get it answered. If there's something that y'all want to say, just click everyone so that everybody can see it. If it's just something for hosts and panelists, it'll obviously just hosts and panelists. I'm Ethan. If we haven't met, I've spent the better part of the last 20 years thinking about college essays and college admissions. I wrote a couple books on it. Started College Essay Guy. I mean, I really started doing this in like 2003, but College Essay Guy started officially about 12 years ago, 12-ish years ago. And my hope is to bring more ease, joy, and purpose to your life through this process, because I think that done well and done right, I think this process can be transformational. And yeah, so I wonder if maybe, Tom, you could set us up with this application a little bit. Well, actually, maybe let's let Ali just sort of give context on this student to just give us a little bit of backstory for a minute or two. And then we'll kick it over to Tom to sort of give the AO perspective on things. And then Ali and I are going to kind of walk through the application sort of piece by piece. And yeah, we'll go from there. So Ali, set us up here. Who are we talking about? We don't have to use the real student's name, although the student said we could use their real name. But yeah, set us up here. Who are we talking about?
Yeah, we won't use the student's real name. We'll use Miley. And so let's see. Miley, it was a rising senior on Maui that I worked with 2 or 3 years ago. Little background, I was in the Bay Area for around 13 years. I'm a Stanford grad, but then I eventually moved back to Maui. And so I actually worked with this student in my other love as her dance teacher. And so as she was getting ready to apply to colleges and to many highly selective colleges and found out that I do this work with students, she and her family approached me and asked if, I'd be willing to work with, their daughter who is, a world-class dancer. And you'll see that, in her application, that is like her entire world, what she spends 90% of her life doing. And then I would say just in terms of like how she was as a student in session, I would say she was a, sort of like very even-keeled student, very steady, introspective, a little on the quieter side. But in terms of, when she would go back into, her own writing space, she'd come back with writing that was so naturally and like effortlessly beautiful and cinematic, with the natural poeticism. So yeah, just like a really cool student that I enjoyed working with. Sort of different from me. I'm very energetic and chatty. And she sort of came in with a little bit, steadier energy. And I feel like we're going to see that in her essay as well.
Lovely. Thanks. Tom, do you want to share screen, or do you want to talk about the application, or do you want to share screen? What do you think's best? You're muted, darling.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just
Sweet.
1 second. So before we get into the actual application, I think something that is valuable to voice is that, you know, in terms of like bringing the AO perspective, we are going to be spending the bulk of our time today talking about the qualitative parts of the student's application, right? We are going to show you, because many of you may be tuning in, I think a lot of you are parents, based on just who registered for this. Many of you are students, and I imagine probably a decent amount of you are juniors in high school. So some of you may have never actually seen an actual common application before, and you maybe you have some jotting and brainstorming and some Google Docs or whatnot. But we think it's really valuable to see kind of how the actual application would actually look like to the person who's reading it. So that's going to be one goal of the beginning of my spiel. And I also want to acknowledge that you probably have seen lots of videos and content, if your algorithm looks anything like mine, which has been occupational hazard, lots about college admissions and college counseling and what it takes to make a competitive application. And I'm like, I don't need these videos. I know what this looks like. But a big trend that I notice is this tagline of the essay that got me into. Now, we're all standing here very much as firm believers that the application we are about to show you and the essays that the student wrote really helped tip the scales and move the needle for the student in their candidacy, especially when most of the students who are applying to selective colleges, like the student was, are typically academically admissible. Usually about 75% of most highly selective colleges has an academically viable application pool. So the idea from that point onwards is to try as much as possible to use the written spaces in your application to communicate your skills, qualities, values, and interests to colleges. That's a very classic college essay guide tagline. But I want to acknowledge that I feel like I'd be doing a disservice as an admission officer to say, like, you can be coming in with straight C's and just knock it out of the park with your essays, and your application process will be successful, depending on your definition of that. I think that is misleading, right? Because so much of the initial review of an application getting a green light to warrant more deep dives and depths into these essays is that academic review. So the first thing that I want to show you is just a little bit of a behind the scenes look at essentially what the application reader would look like for an admission officer. And we've done lots of webinars around this topic. I've done lots of webinars around this topic, the more admission officer behind the scenes review, reviewing your transcript, getting that kind of admission officer lens. We actually have shout out to my wonderful colleague, Tilly. We have a recording on our YouTube channel. That is the most recent video we posted about this topic and about academic assessment. We're not going to be focusing on that too much today, but I just wanted to show you this page is actually kind of a simulated version of the application reader that many highly selective colleges use to read and synthesize all the different components of your application, right? Because we're not going to be diving into the student's transcript or their school profile, which communicates what courses were available to this student, Miley. We're not going into the recommendation letters that were sent in on the school's behalf. We're not going to be looking at application history from previous applicants from her high school, but those are all things that are really crucial to an admission officer in terms of making a recommendation about a student's admission decision. So this is just a little dashboard that kind of shows you the fake student that we're just looking into before we dive into the actual student today is Tom Campbell. Great kid. Tom's actual stats were not this, although I did do quite well for myself. But I digress. Most colleges will kind of have a little bit of like a preview screen that pulls a lot of data points that are related to this student's individual context, right? What high school did this student go into? Or what high school did this student come from? Usually before diving into the essays and the application, like the written parts of what a student is putting forward, most of the time, the first thing that an admission officer is doing is going back and looking at high school history. So what prior applicants from this high school have applied and what did their applications look like? For example, what was a high number of AP classes for this high school that Tom is coming from, which is Glenn Academy. Because it's important, I think, for you all as students and families to recognize that it can be really tempting to go on Reddit and College Confidential and TikTok and all these different things and be sharing and comparing stats with students from all over the world. But that's really not a valuable use of your time and energy, because the admission officer who's evaluating you is not doing that, especially when it comes to your academic assessment. They're evaluating you based on your individual high school context. And so they're looking at things like high school history of applicants from your high school in the past. They're looking at a document called a school profile, which if you haven't looked at one, you definitely should, because pretty much all high schools have one. And it gives the admission officer a sense of what types of advanced courses are available at the school, what types of colleges do the students matriculate at from this high school, what's a high GPA for this high school, what are the average test scores from this high school. So they're comparing you to that localized comparison set. Then they move on to a transcript, which again, we're not going to be going into for Miley's sake, recommendation letters usually. And then finally, they're getting to that common application. Or for many colleges, sometimes they'll divide up this work among two admission officers who are reading the same file, but focusing on different areas. So at many colleges, someone is going through the academic portion first and talking aloud about, the curriculum choices that the student made, the way that the high school is describing the student, what areas of impact are they showing in the high school context, what are teachers saying about their intellectual curiosity, and the admission readers like making notes about that. But then another person is oftentimes reading the essay side, this like Common App side. So on that note, let me just segue to Miley's application here, which I'm just going to do a little bit of just some things and observations from the first few pages before Ethan and Allie dive more into the actual essays. Okay, so the first page you see on the Common App, which looks very, very similar to this, is profile of a student. So you see their name, you see their address. This is all fake, by the way, so don't be going and spam calling poor Miley here or showing up at her door at Macau. Not going to be well received. This piece would actually not be included, just because right now it's not permissible for colleges to look at a student's race and ethnicity as a demographic checkbox when making admissions decisions. Students, if they do want that to be factored into their candidacy and want it to be discussed, it has to be something that they're actually writing about in their essays, or something that recommenders, teachers, or counselors are writing about in terms of the student's character. But the Common App will ask you questions around this, because Common App themselves is not a college. They're not legally required to redact this information. And they use it for data reporting on their own end about demographics of who's applying to college throughout their hundreds and hundreds of member institutions. So that's just something to keep in mind. But this would actually probably be blocked out for the actual admission officer reading through this. We get a sense for the language that the student's speaking. So they speak in English and Mandarin. A lot of colleges, this is the second page under Common Application that just gives the admission officer a sense for the home environment that you're coming from. So there's some inferences that can come along for example, say you may be looking at a student who, this student, is coming from a household where there's, high level of education, in terms of the parents, they have a doctorate degree and a master's degree. So the inference here is that the student is growing up in an environment where college going culture and academia and professions kind of that, end of the spectrum is something that this student is immersed in, on a day-to-day basis throughout their life. Some students who get to this page and both the parents, for example, worked, are laborers, and they didn't go to college, and that student would be marked as a first generation college student. So oftentimes this kind of helps the admission officer get a sense for where the student's coming from. And then the third page here is the education history. So in the Common Application, you'll be asked several questions about your high school. You will be manually putting in, for example, your GPA and your courses for senior year. And you use the GPA scale and transcript and everything that your high school gives you. So that's really important. You don't need to be recalculating anything or changing the numbers. You want the numbers that you're reporting on your side to be exactly the same as what your school is sending in on your transcript. But just quickly glancing through this, you can see really from a quick read, which is what admission officers do, that the student is really challenging themselves as a senior, right? I'm seeing, for example, that they're taking 2 high-level math classes. an AP government class, so a social studies, an AP physics class, so a high level science. They're taking English, and they're taking a seminar on Hawaiian history. So technically, the only thing that the student would be missing in terms of the five core solid academic courses is a foreign language. A lot of admission officers and counselors would recommend students trying to go as far as possible in high school with courses in English, math, social studies, history, and language. But a student like this, it's really hard to say like she's slacking off as a senior because clearly she's doubling up and replacing foreign language with another high level math, which the admission officer would note in their reader form and assessment. And then we get a sense for a little bit for the student's future plans. I personally recommend, this is just a pro tip from me, you can actually choose other and customize what you want to write in for this field, but there's also a lot of drop down things you can select, doctor, lawyer, engineer, whatever it can be. I think it's a great opportunity to personalize your application to write a custom career interest or future plans, because then you can really specify it with your own identity and your own goal. And if you like want to research public policy that impacts Latinx immigrants, you can put that specific goal and desire in your application. And it really leaves a nice impression on the admission officer in terms of that level of distinction. Testing, I'm just going to talk about this really briefly. Obviously, you're seeing a lot of really high scores here, just objectively, since the highest ACT score is a 36. The highest SAT score is a 1600. So the student, has a 1520, which all of this is pointing to green light. Students very, very academically viable for the widest range of highly selective colleges and universities. There's no ambiguity around that. But really want to normalize that you don't have to have test scores like this to have a successful application. The admission officer, as I mentioned before, is going to be evaluating you and your scores relative to your high school environment and local context. So I just want to put that out there. All right, that was my admission officer crash course in the beginning. A lot of information, but now I want to pass the mic along to Ethan and Allie to talk more about the actual written parts of the student's story coming to life and moving away from these stats to, stats to story.
Stats to story. I love it. Thanks, Tom. Lovely. Well, let's start with the activities list because in a minute we're going to get into the personal essay. We're going to get into the additional information section. These are all sections that we're going to introduce to you one by one. But let's start with the activities list. And now, as y'all are looking at this, you can kind of see there's lots that you can look at. This is what it actually looks like when the Common App exports it. And I'd love for you to just maybe set us up here, Ali, for for folks who aren't familiar with the activities list. What is the activities list about? What's the point of it? And why should students maybe give a little why should students work hard on their activities list? Because some might be like, it's fine. I can just put the things.
Yeah, so the activities list shows how a student is spending their time outside of the academic classroom. And so it's a really great opportunity to show some of those, if you know CEG lingo, admissions nutrients. So these are some of the top qualities and values that colleges are looking for, like leadership, like collaboration, like consistent engagement, intellectual curiosity. And so you can signal many of these different values through pursuing, internships, research opportunities, leadership opportunities, the ability to create impact in your community. And so, the activities list is really important because it can really communicate just in 150 characters, what you've done, the initiative you've taken, and the impact that you've been able to create in the communities around you. And so for this student, Miley, she was really, really involved in dance, right? So a lot of her activities are either, she's in the dance studio, she's on competition team, she's a teacher's assistant for dance. She even does sort of like a community outreach called, I can't quite remember. Keiki and Kapuna, something for Keiki and Kapuna. And so a lot of her activities, revolved around dance. And so we sort of split those up to show that, she's able to sort of pursue this passion in many different ways. And then she also has, some leadership as well, which we're highlighting. She has an internship. But really trying to show, service, impact, initiative, and intellectual curiosity through her activities list.
Yeah. A couple of quick tips on this for the y'all who are new to this. But I want to point out the active verbs that she used. So if y'all scan this and you look for verbs, notice that like She's got, attend and motivate and organize and facilitate and advocate. This is a specifically particularly good one, this the student body secretary one. So she isn't just like showed up and wrote stuff down. She's using words like organize and scribe student council meetings and facilitate dances, pep rallies, and senior nights and advocate for increased student involvement. What's great about this is that she's showing different sides of herself, different roles that she plays. So it's more than just like, I don't know, taking notes or whatever we think a secretary might do. She's actually like really involved in doing a range of different things. So for those of you who are, thinking about ahead about what you do, when it comes time to write your activities list, first of all, you don't have to fill in all 10 things. You have space for 10. But, if you've spent some time doing it and it's been meaningful to you and you can show different sides of yourself, I think it can be a really great way to show these different sides. The other thing I want to say is like I think it's so important for students to do their activities list early because if you do your activities list early, then you can kind of rest assured that those things are showing up somewhere in your application. And then when it comes to your personal statement, you don't feel like you have to like weave in all of your experience with dance, for instance, or the internship or the volunteering experience because guess what? That stuff's already there. So a great activities list like this one is going to basically be your proud parent or proud teacher bragging on your behalf. That's like, look how amazing Miley is. And then you can show up in a different way in your personal statement. So yeah, I love what you're pointing out here, Ali, about how there was so much dance stuff. Mixing it up is a great idea. The other thing that I'll say, just a tip around the activities list, the more that you can put the most important stuff closer to the top, I think is a great idea. You don't have to obsess over this. But if it's something that you did in ninth and 10th grade, like piano for a little bit, yeah, you can move that closer to the bottom. Okay, let's start with the personal statement, my favorite part. I'd love to read this just because it's only going to take us like 3 minutes to read it so that folks can get a real big sense of who this student is. And then we'll kind of break it down a little bit. Allie, would you be down to just read it?
Sure.
Sweet, thanks. And are you good? Can you read fine on my screen?
Yes, I can.
All right, thanks.
Alrighty. They stand day and night by the door of my closet, filling the space with their presence. They are the embodiment of a bold strut, the epitome of poise, tall and elegant, draped in suede. When I slip on my 4-inch nude stilettos, I feel just a little taller, a little stronger, a little more important. High up on the balls of my feet, I emanate an air of fierce self-assurance. Heels give me a glimpse of the girl I thought I wanted to become. But I didn't live my life in heels. Instead, I spent hours every week, bare feet, moving against a dark gray marley, building blisters and calluses that were feeble armor against competition dance's cutthroat culture. I learned to keep moving even when I wanted to stop. I attended dozens of dance competitions every year, smiling sheepishly when I received praise from choreographers and eagerly collecting awards alongside my peers. I excelled in adapting to what was expected of me. But for the first time, the girl in heels wanted to take them off. I was tired of forcing myself into a framework that satisfied everyone but myself. When my family moved to Maui, everything changed. I found that most weekends I was leaving the house in slippers. With nothing but small pieces of rubber beneath my feet, I couldn't hide behind platforms, and neither could anyone else. I experienced a cultural shift, which was apparent in the way people walk, calmer and steadier, and in the way they are a community, familiar and intimate. Most of all, it was clear to me in the way people care, sincerely and without expecting anything in return. I also experienced an internal shift. Ooh, it's cut off a little bit for me.
Oh, is it?
I can switch over here.
Okay, sorry.
Confidence didn't have to come from wearing heels. Confidence comes with tutoring other kids on applications of differentiation, helping build their understanding and watching their trust in themselves grow. It comes with reaching out to quieter kids when we conduct an AP biolab on Mendelian genetics so they don't feel alone. It comes with sitting shoulder to shoulder with a girl whose grandmother passed, listening quietly as she reminisces about treasured memories. Confidence comes from cultivating deep connections and relationships to ensure that everyone feels seen and valued, knowing there is room for everyone to succeed. So I wear my slippers with pride. In the studio, I kick off my slippers to tie up my point shoes, and I utilize each muscle to meticulously roll through the arch of my foot, then the metatarsal, and finally my toes. It is a reminder of my strength and the lessons I hope to share with the younger dancers who watch me from the side window of our studio. As their competition team captain, I hear the truth in my words when I tell them that success isn't just seen in triple pirouettes or a front aerial. It's the small and humble things, like showing up to class on Halloween, even when you know no one else is coming, or spending an extra half hour at home every day to build ankle strength with TheraBand exercises, or choosing to work on your bad side when teachers say pick any side that eventually amount to meaningful progress. I feel a little taller when I take the lead across the floor in my point shoes, a reliable figure my teachers can look towards for demonstrations. I feel a little stronger as class secretary, talking with students about modifying school dance's dress codes to be more financially inclusive. And I feel a little more important every time I notice the way my little sister looks at me with admiration as I encourage her shy and introverted nature to make way for self-advocacy. Whether I'm wearing point shoes, slippers, or nothing at all, I realize I am always in heels, for I have built my own platform beneath my feet.
So lovely. Wow. Yeah, one of the things I'm noticing is the way that, so for folks who are kind of new to college essay guy, there's this thing we talk about called a montage structure, which is like you pick a theme and you connect it to different sides of you. And here I'm seeing the shoes as the theme. And there's this sort of temptation to do like a sort of simple version of it, which would be like, these shoes represent this side of me, and these shoes represent this side of me. But this feels like a higher, like a slightly more advanced version of this, which is the first thing I'm noticing. Like this is a more advanced shoes, because it's more than about just shoes, although that's a central theme. The second thing I'm noticing is someone asked in the chat, what makes a great essay topic? For me, a great essay topic is something that's elastic, which is to say, like stretchy enough to talk about different sides of you, which this really is. Something that's uncommon in some way, which this essay is. I mean, other students could write a shoes essay, but there's definitely some particularities that make this one uncommon. And the third one is this other thing that you mentioned earlier, Ali, of like college admission nutrients. So these are qualities like, curiosity and initiative and leadership and service. And I see those woven through here so beautifully. It's just got all the things. I'm just curious, just like take us back to like how the student came up with this topic. Like how did that process go of sort of brainstorming and landing on this topic?
hmm So I think it came initially, and I was looking back at, her brainstorming last night, and it initially came from the I love, I know exercise. So I mentioned, that the student is sort of a very steady, quieter, more subdued student. And so when I saw that, she loved heels, I was like, oh, social perception of heels is about like frills and showiness, and like femininity. And so it sort of made me lean in a little bit to ask
Mhm.
more. And then she said this line. She said, I have a favorite pair of black heels that I love endlessly. They make me feel confident, strong, and beautiful in a way nothing else quite can.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it's lines like that where a student sort of comes out of their shell,
Mhm.
that I lean in toward and ask more questions about. And so I asked her more questions about it, and it connected to, she did pageantry, which also kind of shocked me. She loves a good heels class.
Yeah.
And then she said, overall, she's like, I'm small, I'm short. I feel like I can take up more space.
Mm.
And so that's kind of where it started. And then obviously she's a dancer, and as dancers, we wear many different sets of shoes. And then in Hawaii, we're known for slippers. I know on the mainland, you guys call it flip-flops. And so I was like, hey, this could be a really great opportunity to do like, basically an essence objects essay covering all of the different, shoes that you wear. And so that's how we sort of came up with, this extended metaphor or this extended metaphor of the heels as sort of like performative self-confidence, followed by, these other different pieces of footwear that she wears and what it represents about her.
I love it. I love it. And I love the smart way that dance gets woven in. So dance, which is something that if it wasn't mentioned in the personal statement, I might wonder like, yo, seems like you spend a lot of time dancing. You don't mention it at all. So a thing that I'll sometimes say to students is like, you don't need to make the main extracurricular your main topic because they've read 1,000 dance essays before, but bringing it in a particular way and talking about what it's meant to you, in this case, through this, service, through, teaching younger dancers and defining success. Success isn't just seen in triple pirouettes or front aerial. It's the small and humble things like showing up to class on Halloween, even when you know no one else is coming, or spending an extra half hour at home every day to build ankle strength and TheraBand exercises. Like I see the student's character, like somebody who shows up, somebody who's willing to do the hard work, And it's yet it's subtle. It's through the details here. Choosing to work on your quote unquote bad side when teachers say pick any side that eventually amounts to meaningful progress. Like somebody who's willing to work hard like this is like I don't know, I get goosebumps reading this. It's so lovely.
And I think something that you pointed out, Ethan, in terms of like the structure is more advanced. It is technically, in my eyes, like a hybrid narrative. So overcoming challenges and
Yeah,
montage essay.
totally.
So, those first sort of like three main body paragraphs, when you think about it, she's talking about I struggle with self-confidence and I sort of
Yeah,
struggle with leaning more. I struggle with like authenticity a little bit, right? I'm sort of leaning into like the Bay Area culture. And then she talks about, how she's grown and evolved. And then by the end, she's talking about, and this is how I now not perform, but like live out my self-confidence. I kick off my slippers to tie up my point shoes. I'm the first person to go across the floor. I'm the one that shows up. I know other girls are looking at me, so I make sure that I step up in those moments. So I think
mhm,
that sort of hybrid essay structure is what turns it or what makes it feel a little less cliche in terms of these are all the shoes that I'm wearing.
totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And just we're using some terms that you all may not be familiar with, but when we talk about narrative, a challenges-based essay, that's usually an essay that's like, here's a challenge I faced, here's what I did about it, here's what I learned. And that's a fine structure. And that's a structure that many students will be familiar with. This montage is like, here's a theme, like the shoes that I wear, and here's how different shoes reveal different sides of me. In this case, the hybrid is like, she starts with shoes, so it sets up that theme, and then she brings in this challenge. And then by the end of the essay, she has grown, developed, become more confident, and comes back to both of them at the end. So it's like, if you look at that end again, it like answers the challenge and also comes back to the theme. So whether I'm wearing point shoes, slippers, or nothing at all, I realize I'm always in heels, right? I've built my own platform beneath my feet. So we see that she's grown, that she's developed, she's learned stuff, and we come back to this theme of shoes. So it's just that's what makes it, I think, such a satisfying ending, is that it pays off doubly in that end. So, and it's bringing in so many qualities.
And
So,
it's like the metaphor of the heels, like we don't hit you over the head with it
right.
a ton, right? Like because by the end, the metaphor actually transforms and shifts from sort of like this performative self-confidence to this sort of like internal construction of self-confidence. And so I feel like because we do that, it doesn't feel like we're going heels, heels, heels the entire time. The evolution and the transformation of what the metaphor stands for by the end shifts. So yeah, it feels new.
Totally. One of the most under-discussed aspects of the application that I just want to touch on briefly is the additional information section. And you've got two of these sections, dear students. So you've got the section that is like additional information, which is like overflow. And in this case, she put a bunch of her dance awards in here to be like, yo, I'm serious about this dance stuff. And then there's another section that's called the challenges and circumstances section, which this didn't exist, until this last year. But I just want to fast forward to at the end here. You'll see at the end of her application, she talks about a particular challenge that she faced. In 2022, she says, I sustained a concussion that led to constant headaches, exhausting list of symptoms. So I adapted. So it's like, here's the thing she faced. What did she do about it? She adapted. She says, I sharpened my perception to recognize the onset of a headache, became more flexible, adjusting to increased brain fog in the extra hours I spent studying, learned to be resourceful, listening to audiobooks when my eyes lost the ability to track words on the page. Refused to let my grades tell the story of my concussion, still got A's. They required more effort. So even though it doesn't show up in her transcript, she's like, hey, here's the thing that was happening behind the scenes. This is important information, y'all, for colleges to know what was going on in your world, in your life. Ultimately, she says, I came to understand the importance of balance, knowing when to push myself and when to rest. These are the kinds of things that a college admission reader would want to know, just to be assured that, like, okay, if you face challenges, you're going to be able to work through it. This gives beautiful evidence of that. Could she have made her whole personal statement about this? Yeah, she could have, but you know that you've got this section. So if you faced challenges related to health, mental health, anxiety, these are the kinds of things that could go in your additional information, or in this case, the challenges and circumstances section. So I'd love to zoom in on the supplement. So Amherst has a few different options, and this is the one that she chose. It says, we seek a college made stronger because it includes those whose experiences can enhance our understanding of our nation and our world. We do so in the faith that our humanity is an identity forged from diversity, and that our different perspectives enrich our inquiry, deepen our knowledge, strengthen our community, and prepare students to engage with an ever-changing world. So In the question, it says, in what ways could your unique experiences enhance our understanding of our nation and our world? Now, quick fun fact, for the last couple of years, I've done a big analysis of more than 300 prompts at selective schools. This has become the most popular prompt. So you can probably expect, dear students watching this, to write one of these where it's like asking about what are your experiences and what are you going to bring to the college campus. I'm curious, Ali, how did the conversation go with Miley on what she wanted to focus on in this supplement?
Well, so I think the central motif for this essay is sort of like hapa as duality. And so hapa in Hawaii, it's a Hawaiian term. It's an endearing Hawaiian term for half. I'm also hapa. I'm half Japanese and I'm half Caucasian. And so I tend to zoom in on that when I meet other hapas. But then we sort of realize like Hapa shows up in many ways in terms of like, yes, Hapa as like cultural identity. She's half Chinese, half Caucasian. Hapa as like artistic identity, in terms of ballet and competition dance, and then also in terms of intellectual identity, certainty and curiosity. So it's sort of like another mini montage essay where the frame or the topic or the thematic thread is Hapa. And then we show how that manifests in sort of these like different identities.
Yeah, I love it. It's so clear. And, it starts off with this particular sense that you're talking about being Caucasian and Chinese, connects to as a dancer. And what it does for me in that moment, and is really, I'll just read this sentence. As a dancer, I also consider myself Hapa, part ballet, part competition dancer. We see the students' critical thinking, sort of divergent thinking skills, able to take a word and think about it in different contexts, which is just a lovely, subtle move here. And then the two styles could be more different. Yet, like my cultural identities, I synthesize the two, implementing my technique, control, and grace from ballet to stand out in competition, and a more personalized artistry from competition into ballet. This synergy gives me a way to a deeper artistry and a dynamic physicality for expressive storytelling. Now, what I like about this is that it really it dives deeper, first of all, on like this other aspect of who she is, but it also gives us some language in here that wasn't necessarily in the personal statement around dance and just how much it's woven into her life. There's also, in the next paragraph, a sort of narrative challenges moment. I used to think being two parts of a whole was inferior to being just one thing. And while there is surety in singularity, mastering one form, I choose to pursue curiosity instead of certainty to broaden my horizons and expand my perspective. So there's this little tiny moment that shows growth. And the reason I want to point that out is that I think sometimes students think, oh, I have to show a huge challenge that I've overcome and it has to dominate the story. And yet there are these subtle moments. We saw one in the personal statement, and there's one here where we see, hey, I used to see things this way, but something has shifted for me. And then I love that she goes in the next paragraph. The same curiosity drives me to embrace multiple identities, has also led me to explore the intricacies of the human mind. She gets into, taking AP Psych, an online program, and she shows some of that intellectual curiosity. So what I love between these two essays is that she's using opportunities to show lots of different sides of herself so that we're getting not just this is the dancer, or the dancer who is biracial, but also here's my intellectual curiosity. And also from the other essay, the student is also a teacher, someone who really shows up, someone who's also a scientist, the nerdiness comes through in a couple different places. So it's just there's such a lovely ground that this covers. And then it comes back to this hybridity at the end of the essay. The closing is really nice. Students at Amherst, I'll use my education to assist my desire for supporting deeper human connection and understanding through deeper study and research, which sort of connects to major related stuff. Some of the time, Ali, students will ask, do I have to put my major in my application? I'm curious, how did the conversations go with the student around bringing up major, talking about it? How sure was she? And then how did that sort of manifest in the application?
Yeah, she was not super sure about what she wanted to major in, but I did text her last night. She said she is double majoring in psych, and I can't remember the second one. But
Something.
she still is, oh, it's like a pre-law. It's like something in pre-law.
Okay, cool.
So she sort of like picked psychology and she wasn't like super sure about it.
Mhm.
And so actually when we were, and it took that's why it doesn't really appear in the personal statement, because it kind
Yeah.
of took us that long to even be able to like land on some sort of major. But so usually in the personal statement, yes, I love to include an intellectual curiosity paragraph that sort of highlights and makes sense of, yeah, I want to major in X, Y, or Z. But I do think the personal statement still shows a good job of showcasing the qualities of a promising psychology major in terms of, showing how she supports people, understands systems, reflects deeply on development. So she shows like an intellectual and interpersonal profile that aligns well with psychology. So by the
Totally.
time we got to the supplemental essays, I'm like, okay, we got to get serious. We need to show academic preparation. We need to show nerdy, geeky jargon that shows that
Yeah.
what it is you're getting yourself into. And so that's why in her supplemental essays for all of her schools, we made sure that psychology made an appearance for the schools that she was applying as a psych major to.
Yeah, and this nerdy language here for students who are like, what does that look like? It's things like talking about conformity and group dynamics and the science behind phenomena like the bystander effect and personality theories like Maslow's theory of self-actualization. You don't have to go wild with this. Like you don't have to do like 3 paragraphs of jargon that we have no idea what you're talking about, but just giving some sense that you've gone to the next level with this and that you're able to show up on campus and do at least 101 level work, ideally two, higher level work. Sometimes it's like students want to sound like grad students, but just a little something that's like, I'm ready to show up on Amherst campus and do awesome work. Week 1, you don't need to worry about me. And this can be so subtle, and you're kind of signaling, but I think it's okay. I think you're signaling in a great way. You're showing some stuff so that you know some stuff about some stuff, as we like to say. Just a couple other things I want to highlight here. There are a couple different things. You don't need to necessarily, share more about your activities, but if you feel like there's more stuff that you want to put in there, totally fine. An example here is like, this is a student-run nonprofit organization that brings music and movement to our island's elderly population. As a club leader, I help plan our visits to senior homes, rehearse the dance and traditional Hawaiian music we bring to build meaningful connections across generations. I'll perform a million more times, whether it's senior dancing if it brings a smile to a single face or brings songs back to a single heart. What she's doing here is like, this is something that she's clearly spent a lot of time with. And if you look at these activities list descriptions that we showed earlier, I'm just going to go back, like there's just not room to get into that, with some of this stuff. So if you've got a little something and you're like, I want to expand on this just briefly, it's fine. You can do it. What you're seeing here is stuff that were specific questions for the Amherst application. If you've engaged in significant research, Amherst's like, expand on this. But these are the kinds of things that if you're applying to a school that's not Amherst, that's like, asking, that you can basically put these things in the additional info or challenges and circumstances section. Allie, I'd love to know from your perspective, like the sort of the title of today is like a successful process. What do you think Miley, in quotes, did well to sort of to lead to this to a successful process? So Miley, spoiler alert, you maybe could have guessed this, but Miley ended up getting into Amherst, where she's currently enrolled. Yay. What do you think set her up well? And this is sort of segueing into like we'll do more Q&A in just a minute, but like advice for students when they're going through this process.
Good question. Well, I think what set her up well would be definitely the brainstorming. I think your essays are only going to be as good as your brainstorming process. And so, especially because she was so hyper focused in one thing, right? We spent a little bit more time brainstorming and digging and mining for that storytelling gold in order to really zoom in so that we could talk about dance from multiple perspectives, and bring in examples that would be, less common or a little bit more unexpected. I think that she also just, yeah, she brings a natural poeticism. She was really open to, feedback,
Yeah.
from me as well as her counselors. And yeah, she was really open to feedback. And open to like iterating. So like these drafts went through that was not a first draft. I think that was like 7 or 8 drafts of the personal statement, many like probably 3 to 5 drafts for each of those supplemental essays. So she was comfortable with going through sort of the many iterations and not getting anxious about what the finished product was going to be until we arrived there. So there was a lot of trust in me in the process, which I appreciated. So yeah, I would say sort of like the brainstorming and the openness and willingness to share. and dig deep, and then also an openness and willingness to like really engage in the process and roll up her sleeves and trust that we were going to get there.
Yeah. Give me a sense. Do you remember how long the arc was? Like when you started working together, how long it took? Like was it do you remember that? Like just so that students who are listening to this, they're like, does this take like 2 weeks? Or they're like, does this take like longer? How long do you think it took start to finish?
Oh, we worked we worked for many months. I think we started in July and I think we went all the way up until December 15th. Granted, the student was, very busy and I do work with a lot of artists and so, they're in the theater, they're in rehearsal and so it can be a little bit tricky with like timing and scheduling and making time for the writing. But at least having that accountability partner every single week to work with at least allowed us to chip away at it in a way that we didn't get to, 2 days before the deadline and she was scrambling. We took the whole time to do it, but at least it felt a little more balanced. It sucked a little less, as I like to say,
Yeah,
for the
totally.
student.
Yeah, I think you're making an important point because I think sometimes students think like, oh, I can, knock this out, and if you're on this webinar, by the way, we're probably preaching to the choir here, but we really feel like the summer is an awesome time to be thinking about this stuff. Like, I think sort of my ideal arc is like do the brainstorming pre-work after APs, like in the next few weeks, like in May. And then as soon as you get out, spend a little time while you've still got a little juice left before you're totally in summer mode to get some essay work started. And June, July is a great time to be working on your essays so that by the time you get back, by the time August, those supplemental essays all get released, then you can start working on those essays for whatever schools you're applying to. And there will be a bunch because it's going to be like whatever. It's some schools have 0 supplements, but some will have like, 3 or 5 supplements and getting those done ideally for your early schools in August so that you can head back to school with a big chunk of the work done. And, we say this to students every year and like some of them do it, but y'all, I just want to say to students listening, you're going to be so busy in the fall. Like it's wild. You're going to have your biggest leadership responsibilities. You're going to have your biggest, like, probably your most difficult classes, ideally, if you're pushing yourself. So the more that you can scoot this work up, I think the better. Tom has been very diligently answering probably a whole bunch of questions in the chat. Tom, would you be willing to just say just a few words about for anybody who's interested in like working with College Essay Guy about what it's like working with us, and then we will segue into Q&A. Does that sound good?
Yes, 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 yes.
Please,
Absolutely.
please.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just walk through a little bit of, some of you actually asked about, do you do individual work with students? And yes, we do. I'm going to talk about that right now. One thing that I will mention before getting into this, and I meant to bring it up earlier, is that given that this student, Miley, is very heavily involved in dance, from like an admissions perspective, I probably would have counseled and recommended that the student explore submitting an optional arts portfolio and supplement. I was talking with Ali ahead of time, and we're not 100% sure with Miley. We have to text her and have her get back to us if she did end up doing this. But this is definitely something that can make you a more competitive applicant, especially for some colleges. Even if you're not planning on majoring in a certain area, many selective colleges like Amherst, like Pomona, where I used to work, there's a whole slew of them. Stanford's another one. Welcome students sending in some visual representation of their artwork, whether that's visual arts, dance, music, theater, etc. And at many colleges, having a highly rated supplement, which is sent to people who are in charge of those orchestras or ensembles or whatnot, can actually really help you out as an applicant. So because the admission officer isn't really necessarily judging Miley and how good she is at dance, they're not dance coaches or choreographers for professional shows, right? They rely on the experts on their own campuses to help make that informed decision. So you can advocate for a student more when you have more evidence of them being a great fit for your college's own music ensembles, dance ensembles, etc. So I just wanted to plug that for any of you artists who are tuning into the call. Okay. So what is it like to work with us at College Essay Guy? I am glad you asked. I am pulling up my slides, and these days Chrome is a lot more laggy for me, so I hope this goes without a hitch. Okay. So at College Essay Guy, we, as because you're tuning into this webinar, we're really known for providing a lot of free resources and insight into the college admission process to the masses, students, parents, counselors, educators, you name it. Anyone who wants to know more about applying to college in the United States, Google college essay guide plus any topic, or you can go to our newly redesigned website and search our entire blog very easily for any topic really that any of the questions that you've been asking about, you probably can get some starting point at least from that blog article. However, we know that a lot of times, for example, a lot of you are asking questions about like at my school, I can't take this class until sophomore year, or, you know, I had to switch my extracurriculars to this other thing. There's individual particularities that end up understandably emerging where you are looking understandably for more tailored personalized advice. One way to do that is through, we have a lot of pay what you can courses where the total attendance number is smaller usually than some of these larger webinars where we try to get to as many questions as possible, but it's pretty rapid fire as you've seen, right? So being able to do a course that meets with instructor, whether that's Ethan, myself, we have a wonderful colleague, Lynn, who teaches a course about practical coaching strategies for writers. It's a great time to get more individual attention beyond these public free webinars. And these are pay what you can courses. So it means that anyone, regardless of finances, you submit a pay what you can request in case the full sticker price of these courses is out of range for you. Then for the most individualized support, we have several different options. One is our kind of tried and true signature college essay guy, our essay and application support package. So both Ali and myself, and Ethan too, do work with students individually one-on-one as essay coaches. So we're really focusing exclusively on the qualitative side of your application, these essays, the things that we kind of showcase today in this webinar. However, as hopefully my like intro spiel showed you with like the Slate dashboard and what courses, you know, is the student taking and what was their school context like, there's a lot that goes into this process beyond exclusively essay writing, right? And many students are looking for support on what types of colleges should I apply to. You know, I would like a little more guidance on whether or not I should invest lots of time and energy on standardized test prep. These are all examples of college counseling related concerns, financial aid, scholarships, you know, all the kind of pieces that go into this process beyond exclusively sharing your story through the essays and applications. Some people come to us and are like, hey, we have a really firm list of colleges that we're really confident that this is where we want to apply. So really, we're looking for the storytelling support and having a guide, a mentor, someone with perspective, someone like Ali, Ethan, myself, who's been doing this for a while, or who has admission officer perspective like me. And many people on our team have storytelling backgrounds with, you know, they have backgrounds in film and screenwriting and they've written books. So we work really hard to match you with someone on our team who has a skill set and a personality and a specialty essentially that really aligns with what you're looking for as an individual student and where you could use the most support. You may decide, for example, that you want someone who is really big on project management and task mastering because you lose track of time, like me. So that's, you know, we really try to work hard to give you the person and get that support from someone who really has a style that's really going to mesh well with you. And then also, another part of our process is that you're not just getting your application reviewed by an individual person, just like admissions committees where multiple admission officers are reviewing multiple files. Part of the essay and application support program is that you also get multiple eyes on your essays. So it'd be someone maybe like Ali coaching and working with you, and then someone like me reading some of your somewhat finalized essays before you submit to give another perspective and some comments and insights in that 12th hour in the finish line. But more to this point here of this slide here, zeroing in on college counseling, that broader areas of support. These are just some of the areas that will come up in terms of our work with students when it comes to college counseling. So strategies around demonstrated interest. You know, if you want some support and, you know, help refining how you want to spend your time outside of school, what types of extracurriculars may you want to kind of funnel and direct your time and energy towards, because it can get really easy to like be thinking you need to do everything everywhere all at once. But being able to really focus your funnel and kind of have a more defined path ahead and reassurance from someone who can say, hey, it's okay to drop that extracurricular and focus really on this area that you're super excited about right now, because that's going to communicate and translate to that admission officer. That enthusiasm, that excitement is going to be really readily available. So why work with College Essay Guy? Lots of different reasons. We have, you know, decades of expertise among our team, people like myself who'd worked in admissions, folks like my wonderful colleague Renee, who's worked for decades in public schools that really specialize on students who are looking for highly selective colleges. That was so much of her career. So we all work together as a team with this collective knowledge and meet and talk about students frequently in our process. And we have this process called committee review, where we're kind of giving notes and insights from all the college counselors on some recommendations as to how to improve your application. These are a few of our members of our team. So there's people like myself who work on college counseling, and then we also folks like Tilly, Renee, Morgan, and no matter who you get paired with, just like with our essay coaches, we really try to match you with a counselor that really has the insight or the background or perspective that really aligns with what you are needing most when it comes to support. And both with our essay package as well as our college counseling package, we really specialize on kind of trying to make the process less of like just filling out a fact sheet and more about some of that underneath the surface self-discovery that comes along with this process. This is a very apropos exercise that I'm just showing you a little preview of here on the screen, because the whole idea behind this is that just like an iceberg, where the majority of the iceberg is actually beneath the surface of the water, with things like your extracurricular activities, for example, it can be really easy to do something like volleyball. I throw a ball across the net and meet in team practices. Yeah, that's literally everyone on a volleyball team. What I want to know as an admission officer is, what is your role on a volleyball team? You see a few examples here on the right side of the slide. Maybe you're the one who's curating the hype playlist, or maybe you're advocating for more gender inclusive uniforms on your team, or you're proud because you scored your first ace and that communicates your value of accomplishment that really drives you, or you're a harmonizer on the team whenever there's fights that break out, right? Those kind of messy details, the underneath the surface things that a lot of students don't think to mention to colleges, are what makes you human and distinct, and is a really good way to distinguish yourself from other applicants who keep it in the really basic lane, right? So this is hopefully just giving you a sense for kind of the type of work that we do as students, the digging deeper piece that sometimes you have the real benefit as someone who's asking guiding questions, who's probing you beyond just leaning on your own gut. And as a special for this webinar, something that we're offering right now, and Jasmine, if you wouldn't mind putting the info about this special discount in the chat, so that way folks have it as a follow-up. You're also going to get an email with the recording to this webinar and the details around this special promo to refer to later on. But this is something that's really something that we want to offer to folks who spent the time and energy learning more about the work that we do, learning more about how we support students. And we really encourage you to book a call with our team. You actually could possibly be speaking with Ali, very highly possible, to learn more in depth about your own particular situation beyond my umbrella spiel that I just gave. And lastly, before I go to the Q&A slide, I want to reassure folks who are worried about being able to afford something like individual college counseling, that we offer the Matchlighter Scholarship Program, which for every student who we provide paid services to, we bring on it's a one-for-one model. So for every paying student, we take on a pro bono student through the Matchlighter Scholars Program, offering 10 hours of free individual college counseling to qualifying low-income students. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, Jasmine will also put a link in the chat to give you a little bit more about that.
Yay. Lovely. Thanks.
Yeah.
What questions? We tore through those questions. I'm kind of like proud of us. We got 62 questions in the Q&A. Here's one that came in. Should the activities list reflect something that I engage in regularly, or is it okay to add a one-time experience, like a 2-week study abroad program? Also, can I add activities that I do in my own time, but consistently every day with 1 hour daily commitment, like Bible study or strength training, although I'm not an official program or club relating to those activities? I mean, let's go with this. Like, what do you feel about? I mean, I have my own take on this, which is like, if it's meaningful to you, this is going to be a cheesy answer. If you cared about the thing, like put the thing in. But also, it kind of depends on like how many activities you have. So for those of you students who are like, yo, I've got like so many activities, and you've already like maxed out your activities, you don't need to put every single dang thing in your additional information section. You can be a little more choosy. For some of you, you're like, I don't only have like 3 things, or 2 things. Then I think for you, if I'm being really real, like I think add the things. And if you need to add a little context, you can. And I am such a huge fan of putting, sort of those things like strength training and, other those sort of like unconventional things in there. Tom, you have like like medium to strong preferences on the activities list. Do you have thoughts here?
I do. I We're living in an attention economy, right? Where you think about scrolling through TikTok, right? If something's not hooking you pretty quickly, it's hard for you to stay engaged and give your best shake. So I'm really big on encouraging students to think about kind of giving little nuggets to that admission officer, the breadcrumbs of things that are going to catch their eye and be things that they would maybe want to highlight or note when they're writing up and write up and notes about why the student should be admitted. That's a big part of an admission officer's job. And when it comes to the activities list, I actually have some examples I can share about this. I'm really big on blending your okay, you have 10 spaces. And I recommend giving yourself a little bit of like I guess like a test. Um, sorry, I'm not seeing everyone. My screen is being really slow. Okay, great. There, I'm
Okay.
back.
We can see and hear you.
Oh, great. So a question I want you to post yourself around your activities, and it will help you strategize what to cover in them. Is it an activity you need to explain, or is it an activity you need to establish? When I say explain, say you created your own initiative in your high school that by the name alone is not very intuitive to someone. Maybe it's like some type of service club that dedicates itself to saving puppies and it's called like puppy love or whatever. Someone reading that from the title would not necessarily know that, right? So you need to use the description to explain an unfamiliar term or unfamiliar activity to that person reading. If it's something like basketball, like speech and debate, like many of the extracurriculars that are offered in the vast majority of high schools, you do not need to waste your time and energy writing the pragmatic description of what that entails. You don't need to write shooting balls for basketball. It's much more effective to establish your role, establish your niche on the team. Think about what students, think about like superlative night for a sport. What are the things that are like, is this the student who's most like, or the player who's most likely to trip and stumble, but then keep going, bloody knees and all? That shows a lot more personality and lightness and is going to catch the eye of an admission officer when they just read through hundreds of applications that just went through dribbling balls, practices, learning teamwork, which is literally what being involved in a sport entails for everyone, right? So dig a little deeper, get below that iceberg, and give yourself the green light to be a little more light and playful in your descriptions, because you can be heavy and like go in with oomph about like, yeah, I served this many students through my tutoring program, or I, was really excited to see this initiative take off in 5 counties throughout my state that I really worked hard on. You can stand in the pride of those achievements, but you want to avoid your application just being all achievements all day. It should be a balance of achievements and authenticity. And that explain or establish question, I think, is a great gauge for you to try to have that more balanced picture be presented to that admissions committee.
Yeah, I love that. We've got two more questions that I want to touch on. One, I'm going to give to you, Ali, which is around recommendations for students writing about controversial topics. Like, what advice would you give on that? I'm going to say what the other question is to give you a second to to think about it. I think you already have feelings about this, but then I want to talk about AI just a little bit for a few minutes. Someone asked in the chat, do we work with students on transfer essays and applications? And if so, how early should they start working with you? Well, there are two parts to it. One is like the writing of the like the transfer application, but we would encourage you to reach out earlier because sometimes it's those early conversations that we can have that we can help you sort of think about how you're making the most of your time there. That's going to actually lead to a better transfer application because sometimes students show up to us and they have like not the cupboard is kind of bare in terms of like stuff that they can write about. And we're like, oh, we should talk to you about like 3 or 6 months ago. So I would say talk to us sooner rather than later if that's something that you're even considering, because sort of doing some planning around, again, making the most of the opportunities available to you. That's what they really want to see, the new school that you're applying to, that you've really done the best and most that you can. Allie, do you recommend straying away from controversial topics, is the way the question's worded? For instance, talking about LGBTQ in the context of religion. Thoughts?
Oh, interesting. When before you started gave me the LGBTQ within the context of religion, I mean, I guess it sort of depends like what it is you're wanting to talk about. So I would say like more broadly, controversial topics where you're going to sort of like put your stake in the ground could be depending on like where your stake is and depending on the college that you're applying to could raise red flags, right? We have to think about what are colleges looking for. Colleges are looking for students that can manage the ambiguity of many backgrounds, diverse voices and perspectives. And so I would say, you're really wanting to prioritize showing that. I personally, as an essay coach, tend to shy away from controversial topics in essays because it's like 650 words is not a lot of words. 250 words for a supplemental essay is not a lot of words. And so For me personally, I tend to go to the safe side and not talk about those things. I did have a student that, in one of the paragraphs for her personal statement talked about the Israel-Palestine conflict. And it's a very morally complex topic, but she didn't put her stake in the ground. She sort of talked about sort of like the moral complexity of it, right? And acknowledged both sides. So I would say it depends. You have to be very skilled in order to be able to do it. I tend to like, yeah, stay more on the safe side. But again, it sort of depends like what you're talking about, the context of it, and how much space you have to show that you are open-minded and able to manage that ambiguity and have productive, peaceful conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll say if you are, I'll add to that, if you are going to do it, I think it's really important to show yourself as a bridge builder. And what do I mean by this? I think there are so many colleges that are like worried about students coming up and like, protesting and all the things that have been happening at the college the last couple of years. They want to know that you're going to come on campus and yes, have strong feelings and thoughts and ideas, but that you're going to work to bring people together. Okay. So to whatever extent you're able, if you are going to talk about, you know, things you feel really strongly about, can you, one, focus on universal values, things like creativity and community building, et cetera? And then two, can you show, I did this work to sort of bring people together because that's what they want on campus, is they want people who are doing that work. On AI, I have a whole thing on this. I'm going to put this in the chat. There's a whole link. I'll put this in response to the Q&A. But my high level thoughts on AI. I have lots of thoughts on AI. There's like big picture. My concerns are bigger than college admissions about AI. You'll see more in this blog that I just linked. Or you can check out the AI doc that just came out, which is pretty harrowing. But anyway, but my other concern is like if students are going to use AI, keep in mind that the Common App says you have to certify that all information submitted in the admission process, including this application, any of the supporting materials, is my own work. Okay. So you have to like click a thing that's like, yes, this is my own work, which is pretty clear. Different admission officers, like Karen Richardson at Princeton, is like, it's not bad, but I would caution you against using it because any essay you write with the help of AI is not going to be nearly as good or authentic as one that it comes from you. The UCs are like, it's equivalent to academic dishonesty. Caltech gets even more specific. They say an unethical use is copying and pasting directly from an AI generator. An ethical use is like, if you want to generate questions or exercises to kick off brainstorming, that's okay. But the main question that I would ask you is this. If a college admission officer asks you how you use AI in your application, what would you feel proud to say? That's my like so the orienting question that I would offer you for tonight. The other thing, though, and this is sort of like a vibesy thing, but I think there's so many amazing opportunities in this process to learn about yourself and to, have the experience of being creatively autonomous and figuring out what you think and feel. And you get to collaborate if you're working with like your counselor or somebody, writing these essays. You're developing emotional intelligence and storytelling skills. And my big thing is like if you were to just chat GPT your essay, for instance, or Claude your essay, I feel like you might be missing out on some opportunities to kind of go slower and do some more potentially difficult, potentially take you longer work. But I think that there are some nutrients, and I would of course say this because I'm the college essay guy, that are worth preserving and worth at least dipping into and trying. So my advice, because the colleges, are saying don't use it, and because I think there's like nutrients that you can get through this process, is to do it the old school way. So that's our advice on this. As far as colleges, there are a couple colleges that are using AI, like Virginia Tech, but in the cases that we've heard, in every case that I've heard of, they're still using humans. So they'll have a AI reader and a human reader, and if there's a discrepancy, another human reader will read it. And so it still is very much a human process. Most college admission officers that I talk to are like, we're not using AI. We don't have plans to. On my podcast with Colorado College that came out just recently, Hillary Dickman was like, we're using, it's humans. The UCs have said the same thing recently. So, could more colleges move more towards AI? Yeah, potentially, but it's not now. It's not yet. So those are my thoughts. All right, we're way over time. So thanks, friends, for being here. I'm so grateful to y'all, Ali and Tom. Thanks for doing this work with me and sharing so generously your time and energy. Yeah, thanks, friends, for being here. We'll see you on the next one. Much love. Bye.